Deirdre O'Neill is director of, she's a filmmaker, and she's a director of documentary Adult Human Female, Defending Women, Safeguarding Science and Reason, #Reality Matters. She's a lecturer and filmmaker, founder and coordinator of the Inside Film Project, which works alongside prisoners and ex-prisoners making films from their own perspective. Adult Human Female is her fourth full-length documentary. So over to you, Dee.
Just to address that about the name of the film, obviously we had no idea that it would upset as many people as it obviously did. We just thought it was a dictionary definition, and because we're all in the same struggle together, we just assumed there was a shared vocabulary that everyone would understand. We had thought of other titles, so the other title that we had was Enjoy Your Erasure. But when we spoke to kind of other women about it, they pointed out that unless you were actually on Twitter and that you knew that was something that Sean Fay had said at some point to a woman, it might seem a little bit esoteric and people might not get it. So that's why we chose, Adult Human Female. Okay, so what I want to talk about a little bit is why we made the film. So we were approached by some, I don't know if people have seen the film, but for those of you who have seen the film, Mandy, who's in the film, she approached us and asked us to make a film about basically the clash between women's rights and trans ideology. And at that time, we were thinking about making a film about women in prison. As Joe just pointed out, I do a lot of my work around filmmaking in prisons. And that became a bit difficult, partly because lots of women didn't want to talk to us about their time in prison. So it wasn't a massive step to kind of broadening it out to what was becoming quite obvious to us was becoming a major problem. So the film comes directly out of the women's movement. It comes directly out of a kind of impulse to defend women's rights. In a country where shockingly 2 to 3 women a week are killed by a partner or an ex-partner. So there's definitely a need to defend women's rights. And the film, like all the films that we've made, and I've co-directed this film, as I've co-directed all my films, it's made on the side of people fighting oppressive power. So for me, this is not a single issue. It's part of a much broader kind of attack on democracy and logic and rationality and reality. It's an attack on all of those things. And the film is a rational and evidence-based exploration of the situation. And, as I say, for anyone paying attention, that situation is the clash between women's rights and trans ideology. And the film's underpinned by the experiences and the struggles of the women that we interviewed. We interviewed women and one man. And the hope is that anyone watching the film is going to kind of realize how incredibly reasoned the concerns are that these women articulate, and how reasonable their voices are. It's 92 minutes long, and it's an explainer. It's a kind of introduction, if you like, to a lot of the issues. Not all the issues, because, as this has kind of grown apace and as the trans umbrella has got wider and wider, it's really, really difficult for us to address all the issues. So we chose certain issues. So we chose the question of freedom of speech and academia. We chose the kind of medicalisation and the way the media, and we talked about left-wing politics, which I want to talk a little bit about later on, yeah? So we wanted to kind of point out how far things have already changed the worse for women, and how difficult it is now for women, and that's come up in what I call of the other kind of talks that I just got into. How difficult it is for women to be heard, how often their voices are being shut down now. And it's not just about stopping us kind of speaking, it's actually stopping us knowing what's going on. Not for, I suppose, for those of us who are really aware very involved in this, but for other women, there's a sense in which, because certain voices are being shut down, other women aren't getting information that they need to have in order to realise the implications of this ideology. So what we hope to do is to make an intervention into the struggle and contribute to an understanding and to provoke discussion and of course eventually to transform the situation. And partly, like I say, for me, this is part of a much bigger issue, because it's important to realise how gender relations have always played a role in the reproduction of capitalism. And capitalism has always depended on the oppression and exploitation of women. Without that, capitalism doesn't exist. Yeah. So it's also, for me, it's very much a class issue. Because for working class women, the oppression and exploitation within capitalism has manifests itself differently from privileged lives of middle and upper class women. And I think yesterday someone posted something, I think it was from 2019, of Emma Thompson supporting the trans ideology. And you start to think about, well, for Emma Thompson, it's fine. She's probably got private medicine. She's not going to ever be on a shared ward. Emma Thompson and her daughter are never going to be in a prison, having to share a prison cell with a violent man. It's and this is what I mean, the kind of oppression and exploitation and experiences of working class women are very different from those of middle class women. So I do see this very much, as someone says in the film, as a kind of luxury movement, as a kind of middle class movement, where working class women are struggling to feed their children, and middle class women are kind of fainting because you don't call them by the right pronoun. It's also, what we wanted to do was kind of talk about how frightening it is, how quickly what was once taken as controversial, such as the importance of sex, can now be declared out of date or passé, or it's an archaic idea, and that you're behind the times if you actually think there's such a thing as biological sex and we're a biologically dimorphic species. There's no scientific evidence for such a change in our thinking that can be offered for such notions that sex is a spectrum, or that sex is assigned at birth. The policies of institutions, and I think other people have obviously brought this up, have been changed to align with these new beliefs. So that, for example, the police and media report crimes on the basis of gender identity. So she raped, she beat the hell out of, she, even though she is actually a he. But the doublethink is already in place, and that I think is really, really frightening. And I think this growth of idealism, this idea that it's how you feel that's important, and not the kind of material reality of the world that we live in, and the denial of that material reality, has offered, for some on the middle class left, a kind of pseudo version of political radicalism. For them, the struggle for change is no longer grounded in the politics of class, nor do they acknowledge the working class and the damage that this ideology will do to working class women in particular. Demands for equality are not rooted in an understanding of how the system operates, and how it operates structurally to deny any meaningful opposition to the current brutal society in which we live. If the people who are considered to be on the left in public life are mostly privileged Russell Group graduates who have never experienced struggle, it's imperative we consider the impact that will have on the fight for a different world, and what that different world might look like. So in the light of this, I think it's not difficult to consider the rapid rise of the transgender ideology and its commitment or concomitant activism, enthusiastically embraced by the middle class left, to be connected. And this is my kind of theory, if you like, that it's connected to the dismantling of radical politics over the last 40 years with the rise of neoliberalism and the demoralization and feelings of defeat that's engendered. So what we've got now is we've reached the point where, rather than discuss the injustice of imprisoning some of the most damaged and vulnerable people, women in our society, whose crimes are mostly related to their poverty, we have a left clamoring for the right of men to be housed alongside them in prison. And as for the consequences, and I actually tweeted this yesterday to someone who was kind of praising Emma Thompson, working class women are just collateral damage. The callous indifference to the needs of, in this case, working class women is exactly in line with the neoliberal strategy of demonising and ignoring the unemployed, the disabled, food bank users, those on 0-hour contracts. As far as I can see, this is part of a much bigger problem, yeah? And I think one of the interesting things about kind of transgenderism and men who say they are women, and it's not, and I've written about this actually, it's not the women who toil in the sweatshops of developing countries that the transgender activists wish to transition to. Rather, it's the objectified, successful bourgeois women that they aim to be. The reality for working class women of negotiating the institutional and personal power struggles in which their lives are embedded is not part of the appeal for men who claim to be women. On the contrary, as in all other areas of life, working class women are treated as unimportant or ignored, as the example of the prison makes clear. So I think this failure is rooted, the failure to address this problem is rooted in the left's acceptance of identity politics, with its assumption that a group, or the primary definers within a group, articulates its oppression, and how it articulates its oppression is the last word on the matter. Yet it's clear that one group's identity and its claims may easily clash with the claims and identity of another group. So we have, you know, the transgender claims for rights on one hand, and we have women, the claims for women's rights on the other hand. I think partly the problem with identity politics is it becomes a single issue. And once you have a single issue political kind of stance, all you don't do is think of the consequences of that for the other groups. What happens then is that there's no way of negotiating those conflicted claims. In the end, it's the group that can mobilize the most power is the group whose claims will prevail. And in a catastrophic alignment, which is what is clearly a men's rights movement, the left has chosen to side with the powerful over the less powerful, men over women, and middle class over working class women. And it is that they in particular who will bear the brunt of the trans rights as currently formulated. So rather than fighting for us all, and I think, you know, the idea that the transgender movement is full of very vulnerable people without any power, I think we can all admit, is a kind of agree, is absolutely absurd when you think about the institutional capture. So if you think about kind of, you know, the universities, the police, the National Health Service, you know, whatever institution you're talking about, the unions, you know, the trade unions, it's, you know, I'm in a trade union that completely and utterly supports this movement. So I know that, and so far, there's been no backlash over the film, even though I work in a university, but I do know that if anything happens, my union won't support me. They will support the people who will attack me.
But how have you found the reception? And are you finding there is a movement of these men in the left, or are they like carrying on? Well, and are they attacking you?
Well, number one, I mean, I don't think the Labour Party is the left. I'm not in the Labour Party. I've been Labour. I'm a woman and I'm working class, so there's no place for the Labour Party.
What is the left then?
I mean, I think that, I mean, there is a left. You know, and I know that people say there's, you know, we're above the left and the right anymore, but I do think there are people who, you know, want to create a better world, that wants to make sure everyone's housed, everyone can feed their children, everyone can have access to free healthcare and a decent education. So, you know, whatever you call that group of people, I think it exists. So, I mean, I think there is. So, you know, as a kind of shortcut, we can call them the left. I mean, I think a lot of them now function outside of the Labour Party. And I do think that it's quite fractured. And as I just said in my talk, I mean, I think that's part of the problem now, that if we had a kind of unified left, then we might not have this problem. I also think there's a massive problem with the way over the last 40 years that the working class have been consistently and strategically excluded from the public sphere. So I think, you know, at one point that in the Labour Party, I think 80% of their policies, their MPs came through trade unions, came from manual working black backgrounds. Now it's something like 2%. So you have this massive shift, and the same as the media. You know, so we don't have many working class people in the public sphere. So the concerns that we have and the concerns that get put forward tend to be the concerns of the middle class and upper middle class, and they definitely don't want to talk about class because, you know, they might then have to start looking at their own kind of complicity and what's going on. I think, you know, one of the purposes or one of the roles this movement serves is that it deflects from class as an issue.
Can you tell us a bit about the reception of the film?
Obviously, you know, there's been massive kind of, you know, demands to have the film shut down, and it's been shut down a few times. It was shut down in Nottingham. It was shut down at Edinburgh University. We tend to show it in secret. We showed it in Belfast. We showed it in Oxford on Monday night, but it's in secret usually. As far as my university is concerned, it's been really interesting because I mean, I'm very open about my views, but I don't kind of shout them. But we were interviewed after it was struck down in Edinburgh. We were interviewed by the Times Education Supplement. Now, usually, if your academics are interviewed by the Times, your university talks about it and goes, "Wow,
yes, yeah."
Not a word. But at 8:30 that morning, my HR department emailed me and said, "Oh, hi Deirdre, how you doing? Are you all right? We noticed you've been interviewed. Have you had any back? Yeah, is anyone kind of saying anything to you?" And I emailed back and said, "No, it's been fine." So they emailed me back and said, "Could we have a link to the film and let us know if there are any problems?" And that's it. I've never heard anything else. And the same with my co-director.
Can you tell us which university it is?
Yes, my university is the University of Hertfordshire.
So that's quite encouraging,
isn't it? No, absolutely. I think it is encouraging. It's a post-92 university, so a lot of my students are working class students for first generation, a lot of them ethnic minorities. And I know, speaking to my students, that most of them agree with me, the ones that I've spoken to. University, I mean, I teach film, but you know, so yes, it is good. But also, you know, just recently one of my students wanted to include something about trans ideology in something about fake news, but we've decided she's not going to do it because she's frightened of the backlash, which I have brought up actually, and I'm waiting to hear back from, you know, the powers that be, because I think it's absolutely absurd, apart from anything else, that a student can't engage critically with a topical subject. It's been rescheduled for Edinburgh next week, but they are already kind of getting together to protest against it. There's kind of pages and pages of lies and misinformation about the film that's gone round to about 600 members of staff, I think, at Edinburgh University, saying that they shouldn't show the film. So yeah, I don't know what's going to happen next week. I mean, we're going up to Edinburgh to be on the panel, but yeah.